invite participation and enjoy and participation from people all over the country. And I really hope that this conference is a big work of everybody, including all the people being seen here and others who have been working in the background. So Dr. Yogesh Shukla has been working day and night to let this conference happen.
I request Dr. Yogesh Shukla sir to say one or two lines to open up the conference.
Yes, well, so it has been a really a long journey, because there have been a lot of ups and downs this year, and because of the COVID-19, we had a lot of shortcomings. Nobody was coming forward to take the conference, and I'm really thankful with my whole heart to Dr. Shreya and also Dr. Mehul, who volunteered to take this conference. And doing this webinar in such a grand scale, I was not very sure that how this would come out. But what I am seeing that she has taken a lot of pains and a lot of effort actually to make this, the webinar come live and come true and to our expectations, because we had done a wonderful midterm and now the annual has been very nice. As they say, behind every successful man there is a woman, but here behind a successful woman is a man and her husband Mehul. I must congratulate Mehul, please, Shreya.
Yes.
My heart, give my congratulations.
Still working.
Yeah.
There was some net problem. He is still working.
Okay, never mind. So there has been her husband, Dr. Mehul, whom I also know since long years, and he has also taken equal effort. So with these words, I congratulate you, thank you, and you can start the conference now.
Thank you so much, sir. So at this outset, I'll Mr. Sai, you need to allow me to share my screen because there's an introduction of a chairperson now.
Madam, screen sharing can be done by any screen.
Okay, fine. So I invite Dr. Vinita ma'am, who is Professor of Ophthalmology, KG Medical University, and she has done her graduation, post-graduation, and very special interest in pediatric ophthalmology since many years, and now she is the president of Strabismological Society and Pediatric Ophthalmology Society of India, upcoming president. And I request to chair this session to Vinita ma'am, and the other chairing person is Dr. Yogesh Shukla, Dr. Subhas Dedia sir. He is really my personal guide also. He is a professor of ophthalmology at Guru Nanak Eye Center, Maulana Azad Medical College, and he's director there. He is a president of Delhi Ophthalmological Society at present, past president and secretary of SPOSI and secretary of SAO POSA also. We have another judge of paper presentation is Dr. S.K. Sharma, and he's written lots of books for residents also. So I have personally read his book. Thank you so much. Thanks a lot. I just give this conference to Dr. Vinita ma'am, Dr. Dedia sir, and Dr. S.K. Sharma. So you can just take over. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, everybody. So we have this first session of the pre-conference webinar today, and this is the free paper session. I welcome the other people on the chair with me, Professor Dadia and Professor S.K. Sharma. And I think let us begin with the first paper.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
So the first paper is by Dr. Anuja Bhatt, and she shall be speaking on a study of burden of strabismus and its surgical correction at a tertiary care center. Dr. Anuja Bhatt, please.
Dr. Anuja, can you hear us?
Yes, hello. Can you hear
Yeah,
me?
just share your screen and start.
राकेश एक पेन दे दो, यही कहीं पड़ा होगा.
Good evening, everyone. Can I start?
Yeah, you can start and it's time bound.
Okay. My name is Dr. Anuja Bhatt. I am second year resident at Nagri Eye Hospital. My today's topic is a study of burden of strabismus and its surgical correction at a tertiary eye care center. Introduction. Strabismus are not infrequent causes of ocular morbidity in India. Generally affects children in early ages and can result in vision loss and impaired binocular function. Current study evaluate all the patients of strabismus visiting tertiary care center and to define clinical demographic pattern and surgical intervention. Aims and objective of my study, it is to determine the burden of the ocular motility disorders at a tertiary eye care center, to determine the type of strabismus among patients undergoing assessment, and to determine the number of and type of patient undergoing surgery for squint correction. Methodology. The study design is cross-sectional observational study. The duration is for 1 year. Sample size is duration based. Study site is tertiary care center. Inclusion criteria, all the patients with age less than 17 years. Exclusion, pseudostrabismus and patients with any comorbidities. Patients were evaluated for ocular motility in terms of direction of deviation, committant or incommittant, manifest or latent squint, fixation behavior and constancy of deviation. Data was collected regarding the patients undergoing squint correction surgically. Statistical analysis was done using Microsoft Excel. Results, 84% were concomitant variant with fairly equal amount of esotropia and exotropia. The mean presenting age was 5.45 years. The squint surgery was the preferred mode of correction in 65% of cases. Concomitant exotropia was the most common type undergoing surgery, which is 61%, which was higher than concomitant esotropia. Out of 500 undergoing squint assessment, 420 had concomitant squint while with the following distribution. This shows that there was almost equal distribution among ESO and exotropia. Sex distribution, out of 500 patients being assessed for squint, 220 were males and 280 were females. Age distribution, the lesser number of children were seen in 0 to 5 years of age, while there was equal distribution among 5 to 10 and 10 to 15 years. Squint surgery, out of 500 patients evaluated for squint, 335 patients underwent squint surgery, 204 were having exotropia and 131 were having esotropia. Out of 335, 190 were female and 145 were male. Discussion, mean age group was seen as 4.45 years, but in a Brazilian study, mean age group was seen as 12.7 years. In current study, strabismus surgery for childhood exotropia was more common than esotropia. Similar to Beijing study and a study conducted in Western population, the proportion of surgery for esotropia is decreased. This may be explained by earlier detection and trend for full hypermetropic spectacle correction treatment, which would decrease the demand for a procedure to correct esotropia. The number and proportion of surgery performed for exotropia is seen to have increased in my study. Similar trend was also reported at Weekly et al., who found that proportion of surgery for exotropia increased from 25% in 1990 to 45% in 2009. Conclusion: concomitant variant is the most common type of squint, with female more affected than male. Strabismus is a pediatric dominant disorder with surgical correction as a fairly common method. Limitation: long-term follow-up is not done, and result of surgical and non-surgical outcome is awaited. Take-home message: this is effect of awareness in general population leading to early presentation and intervention in ocular mobility disorder, preventing amblyopia, which is one of the most worst vision compromising complication of strabismus. These are the references. Thank you.
Dr. Anuja. Hello.
Can you hear Dr. Anuja?
Hello.
Hello, Dr. Anuja.
Yes.
It is not that the demand of surgery has been decreased, but because exotropia is more common in Indian population as compared to the Western. More common number of surgeries will be more in exotropia.
Okay.
In the Western world, esotropia is more common, but in Indian circumstances, exotropia is more common.
Okay.
Dr. Anuja,
Yes, ma'am.
would you please like to clarify your take-home message?
Since in other studies, the mean age group was higher, it was 12 to 15 years. In my study, the mean age group was 5 years. So this shows that there was the patients came earlier to the tertiary care center. So with earlier intervention, we can help to prevent amblyopia.
So you wish to emphasize the importance of community awareness regarding early treatment and early diagnosis.
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? Dr. Sharma?
Ma'am, actually, early detection, early awareness, but the parents is not there. Especially, I deal with the semi-urban and rural background people. To convince the parents that the child needs occlusion, needs amblyopia treatment, needs surgery after that, nobody bothers about it. Adult, on like she presented, that more people are getting operated later on in life. In our place, most of them are between 15 and 20 years of age, because that is the marriageable time when they're looking for a partner. Then the neighbors, when the family starts getting, so that's why exotropia probably is more commonly seen. One reason, glasses nobody wants to wear. Esotropia is mainly has a lot of hypermetropia in them. So that's the reason. But if you look practically, at least in this part of the country, I mean, eastern part of the Uttar Pradesh, I mean, Gorakhpur, we also do a lot of surgery for exotropias as compared to the tropias. But if you look at the lower age group, 0 to 5 years, or let's say 1 to 5 years of age, then more of esotropias are being operated than the exotropes. That is seen everywhere else.
So overall, we need to be a little more aggressive regarding motivation of patients and also our own colleagues who are seeing patients and referring to motivate the children a little more and their parents a little more aggressively regarding the complication of visual suppression and amblyopia and other developmental problems. If not,
you said very rightly, even our ophthalmic colleagues tend to tell the patient, "बड़ा हो जाएगा तब operation कराइएगा, मत कराइए." I don't know what is the rationale. Yeah, but it's a good presentation. Thank you very much.
So let Dr. Sharma please invite the next person.
Yeah. Can we have the next speaker? Next speaker, the list is
Dr. Diksha.
Dr. Business surgery performed at Pediatric Ophthalmological Services. That's my pet topic. Here, please go ahead, Dr. Lee.
Hello, am I audible?
Yeah.
Please start.
Okay. A very good afternoon to one and all. My name is Dr. Diksha Thorat, and today I'm going to be talking on profile of strabismus surgery in pediatric ophthalmology services. I would like to express my gratitude towards my institute Drashti Netralaya, Dahod, Gujarat, and my mentors Dr. Shreya Shah ma'am and Dr. Mehul Shah sir. There are no financial disclosures. So before we talk about strabismus surgery, here's a little sneak peek into the history of strabismus surgery. So John Taylor, an oculist in 18th century, first suggested that conjunctival resection would denervate the muscle. But after operating one eye, he would patch the other eye. So people would think that squint has been treated, only to realize that once the bandage was off, the squint would return. But by that time, John Taylor would move to another village. Anyway, that didn't work, but it definitely pointed out that myotomy could be the future of strabismus surgery. So after multiple trial and error and valuable contributions by multiple oculists, the primary goal of strabismus surgery today is to successfully eliminate the relative deviation of the visual axis. Surgery is performed for functional reasons to create comfortable single binocular vision and to re-establish a normal facial configuration. The aim was to study the demographic and clinical profile of strabismus treated surgically by tertiary care pediatric ophthalmology unit. So data was collected retrospectively from the EMR and non-randomized analysis was done for 1,090 patients between the age 0 to 18 years after permission from the ethical committee. All the patients in the study underwent a thorough strabismus evaluation followed by surgery. The data was collected in a pre-tested format and analyzed using cross-tabulation. The examination had a thorough history taking followed by vision testing, preoperative squint evaluation and measurements, followed by anterior segment slit lamp examination and cycloplegic refraction and fundus examination. All patients of age 0 to 18 who underwent strabismus surgery between 2014 and 2018 were included, whereas patients operated after December 2018 with procedures like muscle plication, etc., were not included. So this data was broadly divided into three categories. The demographic data contained the age, gender, preoperative squint evaluation and measurement. Surgical details included the type of procedure and the number of muscles operated, whereas the course of treatment included the number of sittings per patient and the post-operative squint evaluation on day 3, 1 month, and after 6 months. The surgery was performed by the same surgeon. Amount of intervention was planned beforehand. However, modifications were made on table on performing the force duction test. So these were the observations. Pediatric strabismus out of the total strabismus patient load was 58.1%. Total number of pediatric strabismus patients evaluated in OPD was 1,743. Total number of pediatric patients who underwent strabismus surgery was 1,140. So the demographic details, boys comprised of 624, girls 467 patients. The recession surgery was performed 85.5% of the times, which is 946. Resection was performed 11.2% of the times, which is 123. Transposition was performed 43.4% of the times, and other procedures comprised of 10%. The other procedures includes periosteal fixation, muscle disinsertion, tendon expansion, tendon lengthening, myotomy, myectomies, advancements, etc. The muscles operated, horizontal recti comprised of 69.7%, vertical recti comprised of 5.7%, and obliques comprised of 5.1%. The average muscles operated were 2.6, and the average number of sittings per patient was 1.27. So the conclusion, the result of strabismus surgery are not precisely predictable in terms of prism diopters correction per millimeter of recession or resection. Even though it may eventually be possible to standardize most of these aspects, there are certain additional like sensory status, muscle stiffness, tendency to form adhesions, conjunctival elasticity, and anatomical variation that may come out as surgical surprise. Therefore, Each surgeon must establish through periodic review of surgical outcomes the approximate effectiveness of the procedure he or she routinely employs for certain condition and modify the accustomed dosage whenever so dictated by this learning experience. A Drashti Netralaya presentation. Thank you for your patient listening.
Last slide was very good. Actually, like she said very clearly, last two slides, each one has his own graph. We can't tell anybody, just give a rough figure that you do this much for this much squint, but individual variations are so big that I'm doing it for the last 45 years, and still sometimes you do the similar thing in the other case and it backfires. But individual factor makes a lot of decision making. Nice presentation.
Thank you, sir.
Dr. Diksha, excellent presentation, but basically it is known fact that each patients behave differently. The same principles might not, which are good for one patient, might not be good for another patient. So basically you have to keep that factor in mind. Ma'am, you are unmuted.
Guidelines, and we cannot have mathematical numbers that do this much or that much. And besides the element of anatomy, there is also a functional element to it of the individual's mindset, his muscle tone, his capability to adapt. So these are the variables because of which we have never been able to answer this question in a foolproof manner. Nice presentation.
Thank you, ma'am.
So, Dr. Subhash, please, will you call the next?
So, Dr. Dharma is the next speaker. Dr. Dharma, please.
Yes.
Very interesting topic.
Good afternoon, sir.
I am too small to screen me.
Screen me on time.
Yeah.
Hello, good afternoon.
Karen, you're audible.
Please share your slides.
Okay.
Hello. Hello, good afternoon.
You are audible, beta. Please proceed.
Okay. I am too small. Screen on my time. Retinopathy of prematurity is the proliferative retinopathy of premature infants. It's most primary cause of the preventable visual impairment. Inspired oxygen concentration less than 40% for premature infants reduce the incidence of ROP. Retinal vascular development is completed in utero where fetus is in relatively hypoxic environment. There is an association between the high oxygen level and ROP lead to development of two hypostasis for ROP development, delay or halting the retinal vascular development due to the prematurity or hyperoxia induced endothelial cell damage, while peripheral avascular retina produce the pro-angiogenic factor which lead to the retinal neovascularization. International classification of the retinopathy of prematurity based on the anatomical location and the severity of the disease. Zone 1 is the central sulcar area, Zone 2 donut shaped region, while Zone 3 residual temporal crescent. Stages of ROP: first stage, demarcation line; stage 2, rigid formation; stage 3, extra-retinal fibrovascular proliferation; stage 4, partial retinal detachment; 5 is total retinal detachment. In this study, preterm babies having gestational age less or equal to 32 weeks and birth weight less or equal to 1.5 kg was included. Aim and objective of my study: to study the incidence and the severity of the ROP in premature and low birth weight neonates. It is the cross-sectional observational study. Sample size 1000 neonates. Out of them, 300 premature neonates with low birth weight less or equal to 1.5 kg and gestational age group less or equal to 32 weeks were screened for the ROP. After pupillary dilatation, a topical anesthesia was applied. For fundus examination was performed with the binocular indirect ophthalmoscope, 28 diopter lens and lead speculum. For nasal and temporal retinal examination, scleral depressor were used. In present study, 30% premature neonates with birth weight less or equal to 1.5 kg in gestational age group less or equal to 32 weeks were screened for ROP. 16% neonate were developed ROP. 16.27% were males, 15.67% were females. 29.17% had stage 1 ROP, 35.42% had stage 2 ROP, 27.08% had stage 3 ROP, 8.33% had retinal detachment. 57.33 were given oxygen. Among them, 80.60% developed ROP. Most common cause of the ROP are premature birth and low birth weight. Incidence of the ROP increased with the lower gestational age. Incidence of the ROP in present study was found to be 60% lower than Vision 2020 e-resources. Stage 2 was most common in present study. Stage 1 was in RECA and other studies. High level of the oxygenation increased the mortality of the ROP. In present study, 80.60% developed the ROP with oxygen therapy. Increasing the concentration of the oxygen delivery carries the significant risk for development of ROP. We could not document this concentration. Conclusion of these studies: there is a significant incidence of the ROP in premature neonates with low birth weight, lower gestational age group. The rate of ROP in premature infants have been decreased with the better care in neonatal intensive care unit. Early examination was associated with the early detection of ROP. Take-home message of this study: screening of all vulnerable neonates can reduce the ocular morbidity due to ROP. Telemedicine approach is newer strategy to identify the neonate at greater risk of developing severe ROP, especially those in remote area. ROP 30 days to light. It is the window period for screening and offering a treatment. Limitation of this study: there is no association between the incidence of the ROP and how much amount of the oxygen saturation was given is not included in this study. Thank you.
Madam, Dr. Vinita, you're not unmuted.
Very nice paper and very interesting conclusions that you have drawn out of this study. But somewhere I missed, what was your study design?
A cross-sectional observation study.
Okay, so it was a cross-sectional observational study. So how did you come to the conclusion that early detection will, or early screening will reduce the morbidity?
If we diagnose earlier stage of ROP, then treatment is easier to given. In stage 1 and stage 2, we can prevent the disease, while higher the stage 3, 4 and 5, morbidity of visual impairment is higher.
Okay. Dr. Subhash, do you have any questions?
No questions, and we can call the next one.
Okay, so we have Dr. Hina Patel. Surgical outcomes of scleral fixated IOLs in traumatic versus non-traumatic pediatric aphakia. Dr. Sharma, you want to make any comments on the or your
Not my field.
that was just presented?
It's not my field. Squint is enough. We can't see the next speaker, can we?
Till the time you can invite next speaker, I think Dr. Hina, yesterday also she was having very high grade fever.
Okay. The next speaker is Dr. Meenakshi. He is talking on development and application of age-appropriate visual function questionnaire in population-based childhood impairment study.
Good afternoon, everyone. Am I audible?
Yeah, you are. You're showing the last slide.
You have directly come to the conclusion.
We are going to work in a reverse manner.
Yeah.
Okay, that's okay now.
Good afternoon, everyone. My dear respected faculty members, I'm going to present my PhD thesis work, which was conducted in RP Center, AIIMS. It was a part of a childhood visual impairment study. So the topic of today's current study is development and application of age-appropriate visual function questionnaire in a population-based childhood study, childhood visual impairment study. Oh God, it's not going down. Actually, the slides are not moving down. I'll have to.
You escape slideshow and then try to show it. It might work.
Okay, ma'am.
Is that better?
Yeah, ma'am, I have come. Now I have come to the. Ma'am, now is it visible?
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
It is visible.
Okay, sir. So basically, what is VFQ? Visual Function Questionnaire. Sir, are the slides clear or should I put it on slide share?
It is visible.
Okay, sir. So what is visual acuity? It is a clinical measure of an individual's ability to perform specific visual tasks, and functional vision is a vision used in performing various tasks ranging from outdoor activities to daily activities. Though there are numerous quality of life instruments, but in children, these type of visual function questionnaires to determine the quality of life, especially the vision and functional vision usage, are very less. The previously different VFQs available are in the literature were Cardiff Visual Acuity, Indian Visual Impairment of Visual Function Questionnaire, and LVPI questionnaire, and Children Visual Function Questionnaire. And all these were also designed by either by self-reporting from the children or by using the parents as a proxy. And the concept measured was to understand the visual related quality of life. So the purpose of the study, which was a visual impairment study done in a community-based setting in Delhi, was to determine the prevalence as well as to develop a visual function questionnaire. In this objective, we used two questionnaires. One was IND-VFQ and the other was LVPI. IND-VFQ had 33 questions. As we know that IND-VFQ had 33 questions and LVPI had 20 questions, and both of them had Likert scaling. In IND-VFQ, it is between 0 to 4, and for LVPI, it was 0 to 3, and it is divided into 3 domains. So we basically now moving on to the methodology. It consisted of 4 steps. The first step was taking interview or opinion from the experts. These experts were the people who were much experienced in the field of dealing with children with low vision using visual functional questionnaire, and ophthalmologists from RP Center and other places. All of them were given these questionnaires, and they themselves choose the question out of these 53 questions. They finally chose removed the questions which were either having similar language, or the function was not optimal for the child's age. The child, this chart is showing how in these two questionnaires, finally they reached to the question of 32 questions, either by dropping the questions which were similar in language, or because they were not possible for the child to perform. So in the step 2, what we did is that finally, when these 32 questions were subjected to factor analysis, the experts decided that the children should be divided into two age groups, one in 5 to 9 years and other 10 to 15 years. In 5 to 9 years, the parents were asked the question for these questionnaire, and in the elderly group, the children themselves were asked the questionnaire. And basically, through factor analysis, they checked whether there was any zero variance. Zero variance means that whether the responses of any question were clustered only towards one response instead of some responses were all clustering towards on one option only. And then the step 3, which involved the factor analysis, it involved the development calculation of Cronbach's alpha, which is the tool for developing the internal reliability of any questionnaire. And it was decided that the factor loading for more than equal to 0.59 would be considered as very good for considering any domain. So by doing this, the Cronbach's alpha by using this factor analysis, we calculated the Cronbach's alpha, which was in the 5 to 9 years, which was 0.839. And we divided these questions into different domains also. Mobility, like the questions were related to child's mobility, daily routine related to child's education or psychosocial, what the child feels, what is the social dilemma for his visual impairment. And in the step 4, finally, we had developed this questionnaire with the Cronbach's alpha, and therefore when this questionnaire was applied to the children who were found to be visually impaired, having vision of less than 6/18 in our study, after doing the best correction, and then after providing them with glasses or doing some surgeries in the form of cataract or squint, we found that when we calculated and did the pre and post analysis for this questionnaire, in the questionnaire which was finally decided, in the younger age group, finally out of 53, 16 questions were kept, and in the bigger age group, 20 questions were kept, and we found that it really helped to improve the functional vision of these children. So therefore, there was a lacunae that VFQs, I know that they do not enable a comprehensive or detailed assessment of the impact of living within a child with visual impairment. But then also, by using this VFQ, we are carrying out further studies to find this in various age group of children, whether it is effective or not. Thank you.
Dr. Meenakshi, it was a nice presentation and good idea to develop such sort of questionnaires affecting the visual quality in the children's. So overall good presentation.
Thank you.
Dr. Vinita, ma'am.
Yes, visual function questionnaires is actually very much needed, and maybe you may have to work a little more on the questionnaire that you have prepared so that you are able to come up with more concrete questions and guidelines for others to follow, and we are able to have a better assessment and understanding of visual impairment in children. It is a complex subject. But very good effort.
Thank you, ma'am.
Dr. Sharma, will you please invite the next speaker?
Yeah, we have the next speaker, Dr. Nirav Deria, congenital cryptophthalmos case report, right? Deria, please. Nirav Deria.
It is so good to see everybody after so many months of Corona.
आप तो बहुत पास में आ जाइए हमारे शहर में, स्पेसिंग करेंगे, मास्क लगाएंगे, फिर भी आपको सुनेंगे. Do we have the next speaker? I don't see Dr. Neerav anywhere. Oh, is there? He is. Good. Dr. Neerav, carry on, please. You can't see your face.
Dr. Neerav, you are not audible.
Not visible, not audible. Only slides can be seen.
Neerav?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah, now you are audible. Please start your presentation.
Yeah. Yes, sir. Good afternoon, everybody. I am Dr. Neerav Dadia, fellow in pediatric ophthalmology from Drishti Netralaya. First of all, before starting, I would be grateful and I would express my gratitude to my institute, Drishti Netralaya, and to my co-authors, Dr. Shreya ma'am and Dr. Mehul Shah sir. My today's case, I'm going to present a case that is congenital cryptophthalmos can be treated successfully by surgical treatment. I have no financial interest, and there was no financial help obtained for this study by the institute. So basically, cryptophthalmos in the cryptos means hidden and ophthalmos means eye. So it is a rare congenital anomaly in which the skin is continuous over the eyeball with absence of eyelids. And it is classified into 3 types: complete, incomplete, and abortive. Complete, in which there is a complete cover of the skin over the eyeball. I mean, eyeballs are not visible at all, and there is a continuous layer of the skin. No lids are seen. In incomplete, there is a partial. The skin is abnormally developed with rudimentary lids, and conjunctival sac is placed laterally. Nasal aspect of the lid is incompletely developed, while laterally it is there are lashes, and it is lateral portion of the lid normal. And the third, abortive, the lead from the frontonasal part is not developed at all, while from the lead which is developed from the maxillary part is developed completely. Associated with mild development of the underlying cornea and microphthalmia. The ocular content is rudimentary, and sometimes it is usually associated with a Fraser syndrome, that is cryptophthalmos, along with syndactyly and abnormal development of the genitals and urinary tract.
Your slides have disappeared. Dr. Neerav, are you still there? We've lost you. We have lost the speaker in the slides.
Dr. Neerav, you are muted.
I think his net has gone.
There's some problem with the...
Yeah, I think he has some problem with net. We can proceed to next.
I think so. Let us proceed
Yeah.
to next.
Are my slides visible now?
No, not yet.
We can see you, but not your slides. Okay.
Are you able to click on share screen there?
Yeah.
Are they visible now?
It is low. It is. Yeah.
Okay, it's coming up now. Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry for the interruption. There was some net issue. On the similar lines, we had one case of a 2-month-old girl which was brought to us with abnormality in her left eye since birth. Her birth history was normal as she was having a spontaneous vaginal delivery after the full-term gestation. Antenatal history was unremarkable. There was no history of consanguineous marriages in the family. Ocular examination did not reveal any abnormality in the right eye. Vision was good. The lower in the left eye, the lower lid, except in the lateral 4 mm portion, which had a lid margin and eyelashes, was replaced by a fold of skin. And patient was having rudimentary eyeball and rudimentary tarsal plate, which was confirmed on ultra B scan, puncta without canalized lacrimal system. So on the similar lines, we thought it is a case of cryptophthalmos, and we diagnosed it. But when we operated the same case, it was found that there was no bone. There was no bone, and the histopathological examination revealed that it was a dermoid cyst. So it mimicked like an cryptophthalmos case. This was the case which came to our clinic, and there was another case in which orbital reconstruction was done, which is followed by skin grafting and fitted artificial eye. So I'm not aware of many reports of rudimentary cystic eyeball treated surgically, but the cosmetic correction can be achieved with the follow-up of 6 years. So my cryptophthalmos can be treated surgically if for the cosmetic correction. Thank you.
Thank you.
But very well tackled cosmetically. And it's so ghastly for the parents to have a child, both eyes macrocornea, both eyes macrophthalmos. So difficult to explain to them. But this was luckily only one eye is there. But you
Yes,
made it very well.
Yes, very nicely
Yes, sir.
tackled a difficult problem.
Yeah.
And basically, in the second case, it was grossly visible as a cystic case. It was not like that of cryptococcus.
So we proceed to the next speaker. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
Dr. Subhash, will you invite?
Just, ma'am, I am inviting.
Okay.
The next speaker is Dr. Pankiti Shah. She will be speaking on study of ocular alignment in early post-operative period in strabismus surgeries in tertiary care centers. Dr. Pankiti, please.
Can I start?
Yeah.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for this opportunity that I can present my study of ocular alignment in early post-operative period in strabismus surgery performed at the Tertiary Eye Care Center. I am Dr. Pankiti Shah, third-year resident at CH Nagri Eye Hospital, Ahmedabad, and I have performed the study under the guidance of my PG guide, Dr. Reema Rawal. So as we know, strabismus is something which we are commonly encountering in our day-to-day OPDs, and mainly a disorder of childhood concentrated in the first decade and maturity of the assessment and the most aggressive form of treatment we require in the first decade. And the importance of early diagnosis and prompt treatment cannot be stressed enough, because if left untreated, the
Dr.
long-term
Pankit, can you come closer to the mic, please? We can't hear
yes,
you
sir.
properly.
Hello?
We can't hear
Yeah.
you properly. Can you come closer?
Please
to
come
the mic?
closer to the mic.
Okay, sir. I am okay. I am using my earphones for this. Am I audible, or should I speak louder?
Yeah. Now it is better.
Okay, sir. Okay, sir. Okay, thank you. So, okay, so strabismus is something we encounter commonly in our OPDs, and mainly a disorder of childhood. And the main form of aggressive assessment and treatment is mainly required in the first decade. to prevent the long-term consequences like amblyopia, which are permanent and the child has to live with the consequences for the rest of her life. The indications of surgery, mainly strabismus, we perform to give a good binocular single vision to the patient along with a good cosmesis. So the aim of my study is to determine the ocular alignment in early post-operative period in strabismus surgery at the tertiary eye care center. We have enrolled 100 patients for a period of 2 years operated at our tertiary eye care institute. The patients belong to the category of comitant horizontal strabismus. Pre-op and post-operative evaluation performed at day 1 and day 14 of post-operative, and the data regarding the demographics and the clinical findings were entered in a specifically designed pro forma. So the results of a study, these are the observations we made in our study. We have classified the patients undergoing surgery on the basis of the form deviations and the direction of the deviation, and the intermittency and the constancy of deviation. As we can see, more amount of females have undergone strabismus surgery compared to the males. The age distribution in, we are a dedicated ophthalmology institute, so we have a few limitations when it comes to giving general anesthesia because the patients who require a general setup. So mainly the strabismus surgery patients are aligned. Majority of them belong to the age group of 9 to 11, the school going age group. According to the type of surgery, majority surgeries performed at our institute constitute a double muscle surgery. Fewer patients require a single muscle and even fewer require a triple muscle surgery. Now the results of the surgery, there was pretty good ocular alignment following surgery in esotropia. Out of a total of 41 patients undergoing surgery, undercorrection was found in 8 patients and no overcorrections were found in the surgery, and 33 patients were rendered orthophoric. And in exotropia, out of total of 59 patients undergoing the surgery, undercorrection was found in 5 and overcorrection were found in 3, and 51 patients were rendered orthophoric. In the discussion, the majority of the patients having strabismus surgery were rendered orthophoric after the surgery. A few patients having residual under or overcorrection, and more amount of these are seen in esotropic group of patients. So the conclusion is strabismus surgery gives good results in ocular alignment. All type of horizontal squint can be corrected adequately by surgery. Undercorrection is an issue of concern in adult esotropia. And the take-home message is early surgical correction should be encouraged in comitant strabismus, especially horizontal, as good correction can be obtained. And family physicians can play an important role in early referrals and counseling. The limitation of the study is sensory evaluation we have not taken into consideration in this study, and the lack of long-term follow-up. Thank you for your patient listening.
So, Dr. Pankiti, you have already mentioned that long-term follow-up was limitation of your study. So basically in this sort of patients, the ocular alignment with the effect of ocular alignment decreases with the time. So in early period, success rate of 80 to 90% is a good result, but once we see 3 months, 6 months, or 1 year follow-up, the success rate decreases with time. So
I will take it as a future scope for the study.
See, the ocular alignment does change with time, and besides what I was seeing, your figures of orthophoria are very high. Probably with by orthophoria, you mean certain amount of phoria which is compensating and becoming straight. Because you see, even some amount of exo or esophoria which has binocular single vision is taken as a very good correction. It need not necessarily be orthophoria. Right? So you need to look into that. And besides, you see, this thing I am seeing repeatedly with our PGs, that your aims and objectives of the study is something else and your conclusion is something else. So you must be really aware of what was your aim in the beginning of the study. Your aim was to study the outcome of early postoperative strabismus surgery, right? And after that, you cannot have a conclusion that we must do early surgery, right? So
that is the take-home message. The conclusion is
yeah, that take-home message is there even without your study. You see, we have to take the take-home message from your study. So that is just a point that I want to repeatedly bring to the notice of our postgraduate. Right, very nice
Right.
paper and a very good exhaustive follow-up, whatever you have done of your patients. It is not easy to see them pre-operatively and see them post-operatively, even if it was not a long-term follow-up. Well
Thank you,
done.
ma'am. Thank you so much.
So we have the next speaker. We have all become virtual today. Dr. Ruchi Bodat. Epidemiology of blepharophimosis syndrome in a tertiary care center.
Good afternoon, all. Am I audible?
Yeah.
Yes, very nicely audible.
So, my presentation is visible.
Not
It
yet.
is
Good afternoon again. I'm pursuing secondary DNB from Drashti Netralaya, Dahod, Gujarat. First of all, I would like to express my gratitude towards my institute and Drashti Netralaya and my mentors, Shreya Shah ma'am and Mehul Shah sir. I will be presenting clinical profiles of patients with blepharophimosis syndrome. There is no financial interest in this. Blepharophimosis ptosis epicanthus inversus syndrome. It is the uncommon inherited dysmorphic syndrome with primarily affecting the soft tissue of the midface. Blepharophimosis is when eyelids are abnormally narrow horizontally. Horizontal palpebral fissure gets narrower than less than 22 millimeter, and drooping of the upper eyelid because of bilateral dysplasia of LPS muscle that resulting in a ptosis and narrowing of the vertical palpebral fissure as well. Epicanthus inversus is a skin fold arising from the medial lower eyelid and ascending to upper eyelid. And then telecanthus, it is a lateral displacement of the inner canthi leading to increased intercanthal distance. Other associations are ectropion, high arch brows, strabismus, tear duct located at the wrong place, microphthalmos. There is increased risk of developing refractive error and amblyopia as well. ES is inherited in autosomal dominant manner or sporadic from de novo mutation in FOXL2 gene on chromosome 3q23. There are two types. BPES1 is more common type, and only males can transmit this disease. Females affected are infertile with primary ovarian insufficiency. BPES2 is less common type, and both males and females can transmit this disease, and not associated with female infertility. My objective of study is to study the epidemiology and the clinical profile of the patient with blepharophimosis syndrome. This is retrospective study at the tertiary eye care center. All data was documented in pre-tested format, exported from EMR, descriptive and cross-tabulation method used and analyzed with SPSS 22. Prevalence, worldwide birth prevalence of BPES is unknown, hence not reported in majority of the literatures. At the Drashti Netralaya, being a tertiary eye care center, we got the prevalence of 0.006%. We found 29 patients with blepharophimosis syndrome, out of which 23 were children and 6 were adults. Specifically, 25 were males and 4 were females. Other observations are a mean age group of this patient was 7.8 plus or minus 5 years. Presenting vision with greater than 6/24 in both eyes is 37.7%, and the patient were underwent to surgery was 10. So treatment is purely surgical, and we are aiming to prevent neck muscle hypertrophy, increase the field vision, and cosmetic correction and other symptomatic corrections. It can be corrected in 3 steps. Correction of first step is correction of a telecanthus and epicanthus inversus by medial canthoplasty. And this can be done by various methods like Hornblas CU-plasty, double Z plasty, YV plasty, and intranasal transnasal wiring. Step 2 is lateral canthectomy. This can lead to, this can give us a widening of 6 to 8 millimeter of horizontal palpebral fissure. And step 3 is the ptosis correction. And this can be done by Bro suspension method in majority of the cases. So these are pictures showing medial canthoplasty followed by the ptosis correction. There can be complications like infection and scar formation. And the conclusion of my study is blepharophimosis ptosis epicanthus inversus syndrome is relatively rare condition and mostly have a familial tendency. Meticulous preoperative evaluation and accurate measurements with staged surgical technique can lead to correction of this congenital disorder with satisfactory osmosis and can improve the visual function. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and for taking up this complex topic, which sometimes requires more than one surgery to have a satisfactory correction. And these kind of micro flaps and stitching them requires a lot of patience as well. But anyway, you have done it and very good. So what was your study design? Would you like to tell?
Ma'am, I have studied retrospectively all the cases of blepharophimosis patients. So I have studied the age group, in which age group they have presented. And there are congenital cases as well, and we can see the adults as well. And the correction, the surgical correction, how we can correct it surgically, and by which method, and that's it, ma'am.
No, so it was a retrospective study, right? So all
Yes,
these,
ma'am. Yes,
when
ma'am.
you put them up, they had already been corrected and you reviewed their records. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am. I have reviewed 29 patients of blepharophimosis diagnosed patient, and how many of them were underwent for a surgery, and I have studied the outcome of after surgery as well.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am.
Anybody has any questions or any clarifications? So, okay, so we go on to the next speaker. Dr. Sharma, will you please invite?
I think it's the last speaker we have.
Second last.
No, second last. Epidemiology of congenital malformations. Dr. Ruhi Gune.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you see my screen now?
Yeah, you got audible. Thank you.
உங்க போன்ல தான் மிஸ்டேக். நான் அதுக்கே இங்கேயே பண்ணேன். இப்போ எவனோ ஒருத்தன்
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is Dr. Ruhi Gune, a second-year DNB resident of Drashti Netralaya, Dahod, Gujarat. Before beginning my topic for the day, I would like to express my heartfelt gratitude and thanks to my institute, Drashti Netralaya, along with a heartfelt gratitude to my mentors, Dr. Shreya Shah ma'am and Dr. Mehul Shah sir. My topic is congenital malformations. So, beginning with this topic, congenital malformations may affect any part of the eye and the ocular usually of an animation, but they may also be malformations can severely impair the vision, whereas others only have a cosmetic significance, and some of these go undiscovered, and they are actually incidentally noted on routine eye examination. Now, congenital anomalies have numerous causes, most common cause of which we ascertain to a genetic entity. The genetic basis of the congenital eye and orbit anomalies is just beginning to be delineated, and future research on the subject will undoubtedly broaden the understanding of the developmental etiology along with the pathogenesis of the disease. Congenital malformations of the eye is an important cause of childhood blindness, and this is precisely why we've targeted the topic for the day. Blindness in children causes a deep impact when you see it psychologically, emotionally, and also a socio-economic growth of the family, that as well. It has been observed that unlike adult blindness, which is 80% avoidable, in children less than 50% of the causes are preventable, only less than 50% compared to the adult value of 80%. The prevalence globally has been reported to be as high as 1.5 per 1,000 children, in contrast to high socio-economic countries where it is only 0.3 per 1,000. Now, as the prevalence of blindness in children is relatively lower compared to adults, a large sample size is usually required to give a very accurate data on the topic. The current rate is around about 0.8 per 1,000. The studies from India have shown that there have been an overall increase in the congenital globe anomalies over the past 2 decades. And most of these causes show that 40% of all causes attribute to congenital blindness. To tackle the current causes of ocular morbidity attributed to the whole globe and retinal abnormalities, we need a careful genetic counseling of the same. Now, the objective of my study under subject is that to know the incidence and distribution of congenital malformation. The method is, after taking due permission from the ethical committee, we retrieve data from our EMR system for the past 5 years using a specific format, and we analyzed with SPSS 22. A descriptive and cross-tabulation analysis was used in this study, and the p-value of less than 0.005 was considered statistically significant. Our results consisted of a cohort of 1435 patients, wherein the mean age was around about 22 years, out of which 56% of them were males and 45% of them were females. We came to the conclusion that the intraocular rates, the stats, came out to be 92.5%, which was the majority, whereas extraocular were only 5% and ocular came out to be 2.4%. Out of which microcornea contributed to be the maximum variant, 32.1%, followed by iris and lens scleroma, which came out to be 29.5%, followed by retinitis pigmentosa and other anomalies. Now, the more common types of associated anomalies is, other than the eye malformations, were club feet, microcephaly, hydrocephaly, and facial dysmorphia. These were actually seen in such children with eye anomalies. At birth, these children were smaller, they weighed less, and their head circumference was also lower than the normal parameters. The placental weight was lower in such patients. Pregnancies with eye malformations were more often complicated by threatened abortion or oligo or a polyhydramnionic condition. Now, mothers of children with congenital eye anomalies most commonly gave a history of taking certain drugs during pregnancy. Fathers of children with these malformations were more often exposed to occupational health hazards. There was a significant association between eye malformation and consanguinity of parents. First degree relatives were roundabout found to be 3 times more prevalent than the other variants, and these came in concordance with the genetic counseling. The conclusion of the study under subject is that these congenital eye anomalies may significantly impact the visual function, either involving the globe or systemic diseases. Thank you.
Yeah, Dr. Vinita, आपका क्या विचार है? Do you get a lot of congenital anomalies? Actually, इनका ज़्यादा था कि they were presenting in elderly age group rather than the pediatric age group. People lived with this anomaly and then they consulted the ophthalmologist. I don't know why.
The prevalence of congenital abnormalities is fairly high. It is not as low as we sometimes think that there are. And prevention is, of course, at this present time, at a very primitive stage. The only thing remains with us is an early diagnosis and treatment, whatever is possible.
Yes.
Right?
And in these sort of patients, we must rule out systemic associations in some sort of patients.
And the genetics and genetic counseling, those are at the moment not very robust in our patients.
Yes, ma'am.
Either they're not available and people are not even aware of it.
Yes, they are not available in most of the places. There are very, very few places where they are available, and at times at very exorbitant prices.
Exactly.
So we have the last speaker.
Will you come back?
Dr. Rushil Ambani. Is that right?
Yeah.
And Dr. Subhash, please invite him.
So basically, his topic is don't rub. It will be evident on corneal topographical changes in children with VKC. Dr. Rushil Ambani.
Am I audible?
Yeah.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. Don't rub. It will be evident. Corneal topographic changes in children with vernal keratoconjunctivitis. Vernal keratoconjunctivitis (VKC) is a chronic bilateral conjunctival inflammatory condition found in individuals predisposed by their atopic background. This chronic allergic disease is characterized by intense itching, tearing, photophobia, and conjunctival inflammation. It's actually a benign condition. However, in some cases, there are severe side-threatening complications such as keratoconus, steroid-induced glaucoma, corneal decomposition following limbal stem cell deficiency. Chronic rubbing of the eyes has been thought to be a trigger for the corneal ectatic condition. This is a cross-sectional study comprising of 25 subjects, that is 50 eyes, who each have moderate to severe VKC in the age group of 7 to 17 years at Nagri Eye Hospital in a period of 1 year. Exclusion criteria include other coexisting diseases, those with previous corneal scars, having history of any surgery, and those unwilling to participate. Grading of VKC was done based on symptoms and careful slit lamp examination findings, which include examination of bulbar conjunctiva, tarsal conjunctiva, cornea, and limbus. Based on these, eyes were classified into mild, moderate, severe, and blinding. For the purpose of study, only those with moderate and severe grading were selected. Corneal topography was performed with Atlas 9000 topography system, which is a Placido disc-based topographer. It uses Pathfinder 2 corneal analysis software that classifies cornea into normal, abnormal, and pathological. Among 50 eyes with moderate to severe vernal keratoconjunctivitis of age group 7 to 17 years, 52% were male and 48% were female. Mean age of the patient was 13.32 years. Mean steep K values was 47.76 diopter. Flat K was 45.17 diopters, astigmatism was 1.98 diopters, and IS difference was 0.9. 14% had steep K value of less than 44 diopters, 62% had those between 44 to 50 diopters, 18% in between 50 to 56 diopters, and 6% had more than 56 diopters. Astigmatism of less than 3 diopters in 62%, 3 to 6 diopters in 24%, and more than 6 diopters in 14% of the patients. 42% had IS difference more than 1.2. Various topographic patterns were found, which include round or oval in 46%, symmetric bow tie in 8%, asymmetric bow tie in 4%, asymmetric bow tie with skewing of radial axis in 14%, inferior stiffening in 12%, crab claw pattern in 2%, and irregular in 14%. In our study of 50 pediatric eyes with moderate to severe VKC, 42% had abnormal or pathological topography. Underlying pathology is thought to be due to release of inflammatory mediators leading to eye rubbing, which in turn can alter corneal collagen mechanically. Dantas and others showed a pathological topography in 22.53% of all patients with VKC. Other studies by Totan and others and Shoja Bezrati observed 26.8% and 28% KCN-like topography respectively. In our study, we observed 42% of the pathological topography. The higher occurrence of abnormal topographies in our study may be associated with consideration of only moderate to severe cases of VKC. So to conclude, in our study of 50 eyes with moderate to severe VKC in pediatric age group, 21 were found to have abnormal corneal topography. Take-home message is that prophylactic screening for corneal ectatic disorders must be done in all patients of VKC, especially those with moderate to severe involvement. There is a need to emphasize on aggressive management and early detection of keratoconus and related disorders in children with VKC to prevent sight-threatening consequences. Limitations include small sample size and lack of follow-up, this being a cross-sectional study. Thank you.
VKC is a very important precursor of developing keratoconus. You tell the child not to rub the eyes, it's not possible. We'll do it behind the curtains. So alleviate the symptoms. Be careful that you don't use a lot of steroids. That is probably, it jumps from one doctor to another in practice. And the one who gives them steroids is the hero doctor for them. But ultimately, a lot of other complications take place. It's a good study, the small study, but needs more elaboration, I think.
It's a very good study, and we all know that VKC is a very chronic, sometimes very troublesome in some children, and you do whatever, and it's something that just goes on and on. But at the same time, a lot of counseling and spending time with the children and the parents, that it is the nature of the disease is such, and they should not be rushing from one doctor to the other, as Dr. Sharma said. And ultimately, the one who prescribes them steroids is the best doctor.
Yeah, but I've seen a lot of many cases I can remember who ended up with the non-treatable glaucomas because of overuse of steroids.
And corneal topography changes are also very, very important. We must be aware of them. The children, the parents must be made aware of them. And we have to detect them early, if at all, and go ahead. Right?
Basically, in this sort of patients, I think corneal topography should be done in each and every case.
Have we missed one speaker? Has he come back, or do we finish it off?
No, she did not come. I think she has got a high-grade fever, sir.
It's difficult to evaluate because if we believe that unless we fill the marks, we can't go to the next speaker.
Sir, you put one in all and
yeah, so ignore that, okay? Which was that? That was Dr.
Hina.